Thank you for the introduction there, James, and thank you to Safe Food for organising today's session. Today's practical allergen management session, I hope to give you an overview of allergens and the challenges facing the food industry, both in catering and in manufacturing. And I hope by the end of today's short session, you will go away with a kit bag with ideas on how to best manage allergens within your facilities and ultimately ensure that consumer safety is maintained. Today, we're going to look at foods which can be considered to be allergenic and how we may control these. I'm going to cover within the session what is an allergen, what are food allergens, how do we identify them, how can we manage and control these, and we're going to look at both intentional and unintentional allergens within your business. We're going to consider what are the risks and how do we communicate these allergen controls to all stakeholders within our business. As businesses, as James says, particularly catering, start to reopen following prolonged closures due to COVID, it's important that we have adequate allergen controls in place, and we need to review the effectiveness of our existing allergen controls and see if those remain valid or if there's something we need to change within them. So I think it's important early on in this presentation to think about reviewing your systems and seeing if there's something different that you need to be considering. So let's start with a few definitions. What is an allergen? An allergen is any substance, most often a protein, that causes an allergenic reaction. Common allergens are foods, pollen, grasses, dust, insect venom, and some medications. Today we're going to concentrate on food allergens and how we control them. So an allergy is an identifiable immunological response to food or food additives which may involve the respiratory system, the gastrointestinal tract, the skin or central nervous system, and in severe cases, this may result in anaphylactic shock. So there's nothing wrong with the food itself, it's just that some people take an allergenic reaction to it, and it's the protein element that causes this adverse reaction. Reactions may be an intolerance causing gastric problems or a rash or respiratory or breathing issues. And anaphylactic reaction is the most severe reaction that we can get, causing swelling of the mouth and throat and closing of the airways, blood pressure drops, and unfortunately it can be fatal. So an allergen can cause a very severe adverse reaction. Today, we want to highlight the reality of allergies in our industry. It's now known as food hypersensitivity, and this includes allergenic reactions as well as intolerances. It's estimated that 1 to 2% of the population have a food allergy, and within the world, that equates to millions of people who may suffer from a food allergy. The number is higher in children, with a figure of 5 to 8% of children having a food allergy. And this can include various foods which they are more prone to be allergic to, including milk and eggs. And often they will grow out of allergies to milk and eggs, but not always. And nuts is also one which seems to be quite prevalent with children as well. You can have a food allergy from a young age and this have it all of your life, or you may start to grow out of it, as I said, particularly with milk and eggs in children. Or you may suddenly become allergic to a food ingredient at any point in your life. 1 in 100 people suffer from celiac disease, which is quite a debilitating condition relating to how we absorb nutrients in our body and caused by an intolerance to gluten. 1 in 100 suffer from a food intolerance of some form. Anaphylaxis is defined as by a number of signs and symptoms alone or in combination, which occur within minutes of consuming the food or up to a few hours after exposure to the provoking agent. It can be mild, moderate, or it can be extremely severe. Most cases are mild, but anaphylaxis has the potential to become life-threatening, according to the World Health Organization. So hypersensitivity is a serious topic, and it is now considered one of the 4 food safety hazards that we need to consider within our industry. Microbiological, chemical, physical, and now allergenic as well. And it should be considered to be of equal importance. It is a topic that some people do not quite realise the seriousness of, and actually do not realise how debilitating a food hypersensitivity issue can be. Of course, some people do make lifestyle choices and they avoid certain foods because of this. Perhaps avoiding gluten, for example, which is quite a common one because they believe that it has an adverse health effect. That is their choice. The fear then is that people within the industry perhaps think that everybody is making that choice. And the fact is that some people actually have a food hypersensitivity whilst others are making that choice. So if someone approaches us about wishing to avoid a certain allergen, we need to accommodate that. It is not for us to decide whether it is a lifestyle choice or whether it is a true hypersensitivity issue. I'd like to take this opportunity to look at a few product recalls within the UK and Ireland. In recent years, allergens have been continuing to be the main cause of product recalls in our industry, and these normally equate around 50% of product recalls. Last year, I did a summary, and I would do it at the same time. Normally in October every year, I would have a look from January through to October for another presentation that I would be sharing. And I had a look at both UK and Ireland to see if there was any comparable and if there was any change indeed in the product recalls. In the UK, the figure was around about 49% of product recalls were related to allergen issues. And when we look at the allergens of concern, virtually all of the 14 allergens were involved within these product recalls. Microbiological was around about 20%, chemical was the lowest one with 4%, physical and miscellaneous were fairly similar, around 13 and 14%. In the south of Ireland, the figures generally would be very comparable to the UK figures. However, in 2020, we did have a disparity where chemical came in at 22% as a comparison of 4%. And this was really due to an unauthorised pesticide, ethylene oxide, which related to a number of chemical product recalls, including seeds, including sesame seeds, which had been contaminated. And I believe that this has really skewed the figures, resulting in allergen recalls now being 31% in the same period. So we just need to be careful when we look at figures like this, that really allergens was still quite a large percentage, even with this one problem that we had with chemicals. So as I said, virtually all allergens were involved in these product recalls. However, I was drawn to the number of product recalls relating to milk. There seemed to be an increase in the number of milk recalls being published. And this is quite a worrying trend, but quite a lot of this seems to be with regard to vegan food, where vegan food was being recalled because there was milk present and it wasn't declared. And of course, milk wouldn't be allowed to be present in a vegan product either. So it was a twofold thing about making a claim that it was vegan, but also that there was an allergen present, being milk. So that was quite an interesting change in our figures. Excuse me. So it has become an increasing problem in Western society in the past number of years, and it continues to be a major food safety hazard of concern. Under European legislation, there are 14 listed foods. So under EU 1169/2011, there are 14 foods which have been listed that are deemed to be of allergen and that we need to appropriately label and to manage. These 14 foods have been identified as causing either allergies or intolerances. Some are more common in certain areas within Europe. For example, mustard would be quite prevalent in Scandinavian countries, so in the northern parts of Europe, and would be less of an issue in this country. But of course, people are traveling, and therefore we need to be aware of these 14, and you may be faced with any of these 14. So we have cereals containing gluten, which will include things such as barley and oats and wheat. And you don't just declare that it's gluten, you have to say the source of the gluten. So you would be saying, for example, that it came from wheat. We have milk, eggs, soya. Then we have peanuts and tree nuts. And tree nuts also include almonds, hazelnuts, walnuts, Brazil nuts, cashews, pecans, pistachio, and macadamia nuts. We have celery and mustard, fish, crustaceans such as prawns, crabs, and lobsters, mollusks such as mussels and oysters, lupin from the lupin plant where we take the seeds and we make flour, sulfur dioxide when used at certain levels, and sesame seeds. Sesame seeds is one that has really hit the headlines in recent years, and yet a lot of people were not aware of the problem with sesame seeds, and we'll look at that in a few minutes. So if you handle any of these 14 allergens, you need to be aware that they are a declarable allergen and you need to be aware of that. So whilst there are these 14, there are other foods which people may be allergic to as well. In legumes, kiwi fruit, orange, banana, tomato, apples due to certain pollen that can be deposited, and coriander are some of the ones that are starting to come through, and we are unsure whether they will ever be added to the list. Within the UK, we are still working to European legislation, so just to be aware of that. That may change over a period of time when the Food Standards Agency may introduce additional legislation. But at this current time, we are still working to these 14 allergens under European legislation. So what may happen if a business does not control food allergens effectively? Well, remember that the food business operator, who is the person who has legal control over the business, has a legal obligation to produce safe food. But you also have a moral obligation, because we could harm somebody, or in fact, we could actually kill somebody if we don't control allergens. Civil prosecutions can be costly as well. So customers may become seriously ill or even die. We could be fined, or indeed we could be imprisoned. And that has happened where somebody had not followed allergen control and caused the death of an individual. Civil action, as I said, can be very expensive, and that can come from ill or annoyed customers. Lower profits. Millions of people worldwide are allergic to certain foods, and they will only eat in businesses that they can trust to serve them safe food. And certainly people who suffer from food allergens are very careful about where they will eat, and they will only go to restaurants, or they will only buy from certain suppliers if they know that they are in control of food allergens. It can result in poor reputation and less job security. And then the costs of recall or relabeling or restocking food can be huge. So we have a legal obligation to inform consumers of the allergens that we handle. Manufacturers do this through the labels and proper labeling of their products, and caterers also need to communicate. In the south of Ireland, within our menus, we would be declaring what allergens are in each menu, in each dish, and that's very clearly with the numbering system and is an excellent method of communication. In Northern Ireland, this may be verbal, so you may have a matrix which is available in information, and you may even have a person that you just will refer, signpost a person to, who will then answer questions around allergens. So there can be a difference in how allergens are managed within the business. I thought it'd be useful to have a look at some headlines out there of allergen incidents that have happened. And unfortunately, in some of these cases, there have been fatalities. So these are quite serious cases that we need to consider. So the lady on the left, top left, is blind, and she approached a local restaurant and asked them to read the menu to her because she had some allergies and she wanted to know if the allergies were present in the product that she was going to buy. And unfortunately, nobody would read that menu to her, so she was unable to actually purchase the food item from the restaurant. The second one relates to a Scottish bakery who were fined after a boy from Belfast was hospitalised after eating some Empire biscuits. His father had checked the label on the Empire biscuits. The little boy was allergic to eggs, and he checked the label, and there was no eggs declared on the label. The little boy collapsed and ended up with an anaphylactic reaction and ended up in hospital. Thankfully, he survived, but it was down to poor labelling by the bakery. The top right is a famous case, a young girl, Emma Sloan, who was aged 14. She had a peanut allergy and she collapsed in Dublin. She had forgotten to bring her EpiPen with her, and they went to a local pharmacist and asked for an EpiPen. The pharmacist refused the EpiPen because at that time he was doing what was legally correct, that he was not allowed to administer an EpiPen. But unfortunately, Emma died. And so that was taught a lot of lessons about immediate reaction when somebody has an anaphylactic reaction, and how we need to be able to help somebody. So I know the law has changed since then to allow pharmacists to be able to administer what in the sense is emergency first aid and life-saving. Byron Berger had a case with regard to milk allergy. So a young guy called Owen Carey had a milk allergy, and he told staff that he was allergic to dairy as he was ordering his product and was checking that everything was okay with his order. He then collapsed and actually died, and it turned out that the chicken had been steeped in buttermilk to help with the tenderness of the chicken before it was breaded and fried. And so he wouldn't have known by eating it that it contained milk. The members of staff had not communicated this properly, I imagine, to the kitchen, and unfortunately Owen died. The girl in the middle, Natasha, and Natasha has changed the legislation in the UK. Natasha was 15. She was travelling from Heathrow Airport to France. She had a number of allergies. They were very well managed in her diet and had not had any reactions for some years before this final one. She went to Pret a Manger in Heathrow Airport, and she ordered her favourite sandwich, which was olive, tapenade and artichoke baguette. And she made it clear that she had an allergy to sesame seeds. There was no information on the product because it had been produced on site and was served from the site. And at that time, that was legally correct. They did not need to have a label on it. However, they were meant to have information to state if there was any allergies at the point of service, and staff were meant to be able to inform people as well. The information was not clearly communicated. Natasha took ill on her flight and died sometime later in France. As a result, her family have campaigned, and I'll share that with you in a few minutes. Karen Barr was aged 13, and this is a very unusual case. He died after cheese was flicked at him in school, so a prank that went wrong. He had multiple allergies, including dairy products. Although it's thought that this is very uncommon to have a severe reaction to skin contact, he did die. And the EpiPen in the school, which was used to administer, was actually 11 months out of date. And so that was another failure in our controls of allergens that occurred. So is allergen considered to be a hazard of concern? Yes, of course it is. And as I said earlier, it is one of our 4 food safety hazards. And we need to consider that a food safety hazard is something which is defined as being able to cause harm to the consumer, either by causing food poisoning, or causing some level of harm to them. So with allergens, for some parts of the population, an allergen could cause harm. So we deal with these hazards through our HACCP system and using Codex Alimentarius principles. Codex has a basic hygiene text which it issues, and within that it has a lot of prerequisite controls that must be followed and guidance on how to carry out a HACCP system. They had a very useful update in November of 2020, and although an allergen is not included within their definition as yet of being an allergy, it is covered in huge detail around the need for controlling allergens effectively. The reason that it has not been included in the definition is that there is not a definitive level, tolerance or trigger level for certain allergens around the world, and they want that to be clarified before they formally add it as an allergen in the definition. However, as I said, they very clearly document the need for effective allergen management. So as per GFSI, Global Food Safety Initiative guidelines, HACCP expects us to risk assess potential hazards. And for those that we deem to be significant, we need to have adequate controls measures in place. And allergens is one of those hazards. With allergens as a hazard, there is an intentional presence. So we have intentional allergens. In other words, they belong to the food and they're there. So it's identifying those intentional hazards and having adequate controls, i.e., labeling controls or communication controls in place around what is present. And then we have what we call unintentional hazards, which is unintentional allergens that should not be present in our product, and they've been caused by cross-contamination. So we need to look at how we prevent these cross-contaminations from occurring and that we control them and keep our products safe from other allergens. So it's important that we identify where allergens enter the production or the catering facility and where cross-contamination can occur. So this could happen at any point from intake through our production processes and our catering processes until we've got our finished product. So we need to identify the intentional and unintentional allergens in our raw materials, where contamination could happen, such as work in progress, and into our finished products. So we're going to start off with intentional allergens. So let's start with these. So what allergens should be there? Well, they belong to the food. So we need to know what is in our mix, what's in our recipe. So understanding our formula is really important. Where do we get our ingredients from? We purchase from approved suppliers. So we need to have ingredient declarations from our approved suppliers that are current and up to date. Do they handle other allergens on site? Is there a risk of cross-contamination from these that they may also be handling? And how do they control these? So it's not enough just to say may contain or we handle particular other allergens. We need to know what control measures do they have in place. So what allergens are present in the ingredients and what could be cross-contaminated from the suppliers? Do we have standard mixes? If we've got standard recipes, then we've got consistency. And that's particularly of concern in the catering industry, where a chef may have a particular recipe that they want to use, and that might be slightly different to the next chef. So it's important that we have standard recipes and that we consider what allergens could be present. Consider seasonings and oils and spices that you're going to be adding, and consider raw materials where they're grown. They may have been grown in a field alongside other allergenic ingredients, and there could be a real contamination risk on those. So we need to really understand those. Having standardized recipes and mixes, way control system, computerized way control systems are very useful, or even simple recipe sheets and records that show the ingredients as they're added in. And of course, that's important from a traceability point of view as well. We need to be able to gather our information around ingredient labels and specifications. And so we need to be able to read our labels effectively and understand what our labels and our specifications from our suppliers are telling us. So in catering and small producers, as we return, it's important that as we reopen our business after a period of closure, that we're able to source our ingredients and raw materials perhaps from existing suppliers. Are those suppliers still there? Are they still able to supply us with the same raw materials, or are we going to be having an alternative? It's important that we check that the specification hasn't changed, it hasn't altered in any way. Have you any out of date stock that you're going to have to replace? Have there been any spillages during storage? And there may have been spillages which include allergen materials. And so there could be cross contamination in your stores, and we need to think about that. Have you decided to change your recipes during lockdown? Have you modified your recipes or changed your menu on what you're going to offer? So therefore, checking if there are additional allergens that you may indeed be going to serve, and you need to control them. And how are you going to communicate your allergens? How up to date is your labeling or your communication methods? So be wary of substitutions and learn how to read labels as well. So what would be in my product? So I'm going to take a very simple product such as pesto sauce, and we're going to think what allergens could be present. Well, if I was making pesto sauce, I would probably put some basil leaves, some pine nuts, some olive oil, some Parmesan cheese, and some seasoning, and probably some garlic and some other seasoning. What allergens would I expect to see in that product? Well, milk would be something that I would expect to see from my cheese. Remember, pine nuts are not actually a nut, neither is coconut. It is not a nut. So they are not one of our 14 allergens. Having said that, some people are allergic to pine nuts and coconuts, so be aware of that as well. So it sounds simple. I would expect to find milk in that product. So actually, let's have a look at some pesto recipes. So in the first one here, we have milk highlighted, but we also have an egg that's present in the cheese. Believe it or not, we have nuts in there. We have cashew nuts as well as our pine kernels. Our pine kernels are actually a very small percentage, only 1%, but we actually have cashew nuts. So we have milk, egg, and cashew nuts as being allergens being labeled up here. In our second one, we just have milk. And in the third one, we have soya, and we have cashew nuts, but actually there's no milk in this product at all. So quite a disparity, a difference within these products. And for clarity, these ingredients were identified, were all gathered from real ingredient lists from different jars of pesto that were on sale in 2 different retail outlets, and one was a branded product as well. So it's virtually impossible to guess the allergens. We can guess, but we are unlikely to be correct. I've also found in pesto sulfites and almonds, again, interestingly, things that I would not expect to find in a pesto sauce. So be wary of hidden allergens. Sauces and marinades, seasonings, blends and mixes, stuffings, vinegars, cooking oils, and processing age may have allergens that you perhaps don't expect to see them in there. Gluten can be found in malt vinegar. However, often it is not detectable when you go looking for it. Cooking oils, we often use cooking oils other oils such as sesame oils and peanut oils are often used as salad dressings. And of course, these can contain allergenic ingredients. Stuffings can have a whole wide range of ingredients added in, including nuts and eggs and gluten from, say, the breadcrumbs from the wheat. But even dried fruit, you may, if there's high enough levels of it there, you may have to declare sulfur dioxide. Sauces can have all sorts of ingredients added into them. So tahini is made from sesame seeds. Celery is often used as a savoury flavourant, and many herbs and spices will have allergenic ingredients as well. Be careful about naturally occurring sulfites that can be present in onions and garlic and in wine, and you need to check the levels because these may need to be declared. So where do we source our allergen information from? So you're sourcing a new ingredient for your business. How would you identify where you would find these? So where are we going to get our information? So from labels, we need to make sure that our manufacturers have accurately labeled the products so that we can read the labels properly. Or perhaps we're going to ask them for a detailed raw material specification, or you may find that information on a supplier website. So many retailers' websites have a lot of detailed allergen information by products detailed. And Pret A Manger, interestingly, if you go to their website, they have a full allergen disclosure on their website, and all their products are listed with a full ingredient breakdown, including all the allergens present. They also have some warnings around allergens as well. You can also send out questionnaires to your suppliers asking specific allergen information. And if I was doing that, I would include questions around what other allergens they may be handling on site, but more importantly, how they are controlling those. So how they're going to minimize the risk of cross-contamination of unintentional allergens. So let's look at some labels. So this label is very clear. So under legislation since 2014 in the EU, if our pre-packed food containing any one of the 14 allergens produced on after the 13th of December 2014, you must have the allergen content emphasised on the ingredient label. There is different ways that we can do this. The most common one is to bold the allergen ingredients. So in this case, I can very clearly look at this label and see that there's gluten, which has come from wheat flour, there's milk, there's egg, and then later on we have milk and egg as well. So it's very clear if I had an allergen, I can clearly see what ingredients are in there and which of them are allergens. There's a little box that tells you where to find the allergen information. So for allergens, see ingredients in bold, but there's also what we call additional precautionary labeling, so not suitable for nut allergy sufferers due to manufacturing methods. So this is not a legal requirement, but is something that you can do, and we would call that precautionary or alibi labeling. But you can't just put an alibi label on and think that that is enough as a control. You still are expected to control and minimize the risk, for example, in this case, of nuts contaminating the product. You can do the allergens in capitals, you can bold them, you can color them, you can underline them. It is up to you how you do that. So under food information regulations, it's no longer allowed to have a separate allergen declaration box. And the whole idea is to have consistent and clear labeling across the industry. But here's another label. And in this case, when I found this label, it was a bakery product that I had bought. And I thought it was really strange that they had underlined the word current. So allergens are underlined in the ingredient list, and it says it may contain traces of nuts. So I thought this was a little bit strange until I realized that their printer was not aligned up correctly. And in actual fact, it was not meant to be currants that they were underlining. It was meant to be eggs, which is in the line above. Palm oil was not meant to have been crossed out. In fact, wheat flour was meant to have been underlined. And again, mixed spice was not meant to be crossed out. It should have been wheat flour. So that's very poor labeling. And so somebody with an allergen would find that quite difficult to see what the allergens are. So just be careful if you're reading labels, just take your time and be happy that you've actually read them correctly. So we need to implement controls, both in manufacturing and catering. And there can be some overlap between the two. So with intentional allergens in our ingredients, we need to understand where are those intentional allergens, and then we need to declare that we have them. So in other words, we need to be able to read our labels and be able to then declare that we have a particular allergen present. You may include that precautionary labeling if you feel that there is a risk of cross-contamination with other allergens that are being handled. And then for unintentional allergens, we need to identify the potential of cross-contamination risks. And we do that through risk assessments and then implementing site controls, which will include things such as segregation, cleaning, color coding, and a production planning matrix. So one of the first things that I would do is to set up a matrix. And this one I quite like. This one comes from the Food Standards Agency, and I use something very similar in a spreadsheet format, but perhaps without the photographs or the pictures. So down the left-hand side, I would put all my ingredients, and then I have my 14 allergens across the top. I would be checking my specifications, and I will tick if any allergens are present. So at a glance, I can see all my ingredients and I can see what allergens are present there. I also actually add in an extra column if they handle another allergen on their production facility, or if they maybe state that it's grown in a field beside another food item which is an allergy, then I would put that in another column as well. So I would also highlight that in my matrix. I then take each of these ingredients and I would then transfer them to another page with my menu or my recipes, okay? And I would then, for example, I might have a recipe for a product and it has 8 or 9 different raw materials. So I will then transfer the 8 or 9 raw materials that I have my allergen information from to another page, and I will add those together. And then at a glance, I can see for that either menu item or for that product that I'm manufacturing, I can clearly see which allergens are present. So I would have that there, and that's a really invaluable information source which can be shared with staff and with customers, and it also will help you if you're in manufacturing to identify what needs to be put onto your label. And it also then starts to identify where there are cross-contamination risks within your business. And so we need to then look at a risk assessment matrix for our processes. So if I'm creating a risk assessment matrix, I'm going to be looking at my menu or my product. I'm looking at my recipes. I'm thinking about substitution. So if that particular raw material is not available, do I have a dual or multiple suppliers for those? And are the substitutions containing the same allergens, or are there additional allergens that I need to consider? And obviously, if you're labeling up a finished product and you have an ingredient that you may use on occasions, and it contains a different allergen, that would be a massive problem to you. So you would need to make sure that any substitutions are of equal with regard to allergens that they contain or do not contain. Be caution for unfamiliar ingredients, that there may be allergens in there that you might not immediately recognize. So things like whey powder, which would be milk, you need to be very careful on those. So we need to have our raw material specifications and look at the ingredient declarations. What additional allergens does the supplier handle on site? What controls do they have? And do I need to consider these? Always regularly check that your raw material specifications are up to date, that they're the most valid ones that are there. And I would be checking that on a regular basis and have an agreement with your supplier that they cannot change the specification without letting you know. That's much more possible to do in a manufacturing situation than if you're in a small catering situation where you're reliant on buying maybe from agents. You then look at cross-contamination potential with your product and your process flows on site, and you think about things like production scheduling. So can I schedule in products to try and minimize the risk of contamination? If you're making an allergen claim, you need to be very careful about such a claim. So if you're saying something is nut-free or gluten-free, so under EU 828 2014, if you're making a claim that something is gluten-free, then it must have no more than 20 parts per million of gluten present. If you're making a claim that a food item is very low gluten, then you are allowed a little bit more tolerance, so anything between 21 and 100 milligrams per kilo. So be careful that your sales and marketing team don't wish to make great claims about your product, ones that we've seen over the years, suitable for people intolerant to gluten, suitable for celiacs, specially formulated for people intolerant to gluten, specially formulated for celiacs. Be very careful with claims such as that. You need to validate these claims and you need to be able to stand over them. So I would avoid making a claim unless you really are able to put the research in and to do the testing. So consider the vulnerability of the potential consumer. So allergen sufferers, but again, if you are making a product and making an allergen claim, then you will need to test it and stand over that. So let's look at unintentional allergens. So allergens that are not meant to be in our product, they don't naturally appear in our ingredient list. So where could these allergens enter our premises? Well, they may come in raw materials, not as an intentional, but an unintentional allergen due to cross-contamination at your supplier's site. It could be cross-contamination on your site with other raw materials from people or from substituted items. So if we have a look at where a number of these allergens could contaminate from, people is one of the sources. So staff may bring allergens into the production area, bringing food into the workplace, containing, for example, nuts when you have said that it's a nut-free site. They may be eating and not wash their hands after eating, and there could be residues of allergens on their hands, or their protective clothing could be contaminated after they're handling an allergenic ingredient before they move on to a other one. Cleaning must be adequate to remove the proteins which cause the allergenic reaction, and we need detergents to do this. So there's an over-reliance really in our industry on disinfectants, alcohol gels and wipes, but we need to clean first. We need that protein to be removed. And this can be quite difficult with some allergens. So some of them can be quite sticky and can adhere quite strongly to surfaces and can be difficult to remove. So you need to draw up your cleaning methodologies and make sure people are trained against these, and you need to validate your cleaning with worst case scenarios, and you need to test these using ELISA methods to validate that your cleaning has been robust. Thereafter, you can use rapid test methods to verify, such as your rapid swabs, to verify your cleaning has been correct, but you need to validate it first using ELISA methods. Waste could be a contamination risk, particularly if there's spillages, and sort of the cleanup needs to be carefully carried out, and depends what form the allergen is in. If it's a liquid or a powder, then the spillage risk is much greater and cross-contamination risk is greater. Remember with powders, they could be airborne and then they settle onto all sorts of surfaces, and liquids could seep through and could contaminate other food items, whereas solids are less likely to do that. And then we have equipment. So is equipment being shared? If it's being shared, there's an increased risk of allergen cross-contamination. How effectively can you clean shared equipment? Maybe you're using some color coding. Purple is often used in the catering industry for allergens, but color coding is only useful if you're only handling a few allergens. Once you start to be handling maybe 5 or 6 allergens or more, it's difficult to use color coding methods for that. If equipment is too complex to adequately clean between use where allergens have been used, you may then decide to have separate equipment or even separate production areas, such as separate weigh-up areas. If we look at controls around raw materials, as was already said, purchase from reputable suppliers, agree the specifications, check the goods meet the specifications on arrival, make sure that you haven't had any substitutions, train your staff on these goods in checks. Regularly check if there have been any changes to specifications, so review those. Agree with your supplier that they will not make changes without prior agreement with yourself. And consider how you're going to deal with short deliveries and where you're going to get emergency supplies from alternative sources, and if there could be a risk of allergens present there, or indeed maybe you're better just not to get those emergency supplies if you can't stand over them. So with substitutions, how likely is it that you're going to receive substitutions, and if they are approved? So if your existing supplier is out of stock or you've made a formulation change, but also be aware of special editions of products that you might be producing certain times of the year, or seasonal items or special items on menus that you will be adding, and you need to make sure that you understand the allergens that are present in these additional temporary ingredients that you're using. Very quickly, something very simple like cheese and onion crisps. I just find this a useful exercise to have a look at. If I was buying cheese and onion crisps, I would expect milk to be present there from the cheese flavour. Here I have some Walker's crisps, which indeed do have milk declared on the ingredient declaration. Tato Northern Ireland have milk as expected, but they also have gluten from wheat declared. Tesco Ireland, also very similar to Tesco Northern Ireland, have milk and again wheat, so gluten from wheat. And then we have Hunky Dory's, which have soya, which wasn't in the others, and actually doesn't have milk. So no commonality in what looks like a very simple ingredient. And I think that's just useful to demonstrate how you can get a substitution and assume that it will contain the same allergens when in fact it doesn't. So labelling can be a real nightmare for allergen sufferers, and it really does prove the difficulty with substitutions. So what controls can we put in place with our preparation? Well, good practices, whether they're good catering practices or good manufacturing practices, are important to try and aim to lower the risk of cross-contamination. So control your storage areas. So where possible, you'll have segregation of allergens and have those labelled up in your storage area, and consider the risk of spillage. So if I had a powder being stored and it contained an allergen, I'm going to keep it on a lower shelf away from other items. So if that bag does get burst and we have a spillage, then we can clean that up, and hopefully other food items are not going to be contaminated. So define your areas and have a spillage procedure. You might have color coding. You might be decanting products into color coded storage containers. You might be using color coded utensils such as chopping boards, or even disposable gloves and aprons are very useful when you're handling an allergenic ingredient. And then after you've handled that, you remove those and go and wash your hands, and that minimizes the risk of contamination from the protective clothing. You can carry out that cross-contamination risk assessment, and from that, you can have a matrix on the order that you're producing your products within. And consider separate utensils such as toasters or mixers, complex equipment if it's difficult, as I said, to clean them, and even cooking oils. So if you are cooking a product in an oil and it contains an allergen, and then you go in with another item which does not contain an allergen, is there a risk of the allergen being left within the oil and cross-contaminating? A cross-contamination matrix is useful from a product scheduling point of view. So consider, is it a powder, a liquid, or a solid? And consider what are the common allergens on site. So you might start the day with producing an item which has no allergens first, and then the items which are heavily loaded with allergens at the end of the day, and then complete a thorough wash down. But remember that you need to validate that cleaning thoroughly to make sure that your cleaning is effective. In theory, this sounds like a good idea, but when you have such items such as sandwiches where you have lots of allergens, this can be quite a difficult area for you, and you may need to then have complete clean downs between each product that you're producing. Controls with regard to people, so no eating or drinking within food prep areas, and a limit on what allergens they're allowed to bring on site. Regular hand washing, particularly after eating, before and after handling certain food items. Using coloured disposable protective clothing, as I said, and training staff in allergen controls. Staff need to know what are the allergens, so they need to have a general awareness. If they're not sure, they should ask a question, and they need specific training on with regard to the allergen controls on site, and rules regarding what can be consumed in the canteen, and for example, what's allowed to be in a vending machine, but also buffet lunches for meetings and gifts for Christmas, which may contain allergens which you don't permit on site, such as nuts. So color coding, as I said, is quite useful. Labels are quite useful for work in progress. You can use little coloured stickers that you apply to say this contains this particular allergen. And as long as people are appropriately trained against that, that can be very useful. Or colour-coded equipment such as scoops, containers and utensils, or as I said, disposable PPE as well. Segregation, both in storage, so consider the risk of spillage. Separation in work in progress stores, so making sure containers are closed and properly labelled so that people know what allergens are present so that we don't get accidental use. You might have separate production lines to try and minimise the risk of cross-contamination, and even separate preparation areas, including weigh-up areas, to try and reduce the risk. And then we need to consider our cleaning. So we need to implement cleaning schedules and consider these allergens. And I would speak with your chemical suppliers to help you set up these cleaning schedules. You want to get the suitable chemical to do the task for you. So detergent, which is going to remove the protein element. Sanitizing alone will not be effective. Consider the risk from your methods. So automatic washers, there could be a risk if you are washing something in a dishwasher containing an allergen. Could the rinse water be recirculating? If it's recirculating, then you could be recirculating allergenic material. If it's not recirculating, then it's less of a risk. Train your staff on the importance of record keeping, monitoring your cleaning, and validate your cleaning as well. If you have a spillage, then it's a good idea to have an allergen spillage kit, which is defined specifically for that task alone, and use that kit to clean everything up. So in this particular kit, you've got some tape that you can clear off the area to say that there's been a spillage and I'm going to clean up. You've got specific brushes and cloths and gloves, and then those are disposed of after use, or else are thoroughly cleaned and removed back into the allergen spill kit. It depends on how many allergens you might have, whether you're able to reuse that spill kit or not. We need to be able to communicate our controls with regard to allergens. So all food handlers need to have an awareness. Sales team need to be aware what they're selling and whether they're making claims around allergens being present, or agreeing to a new product without an allergen when in fact you are actually handling a particular allergen. Cleaners need to be trained obviously on the need for proper cleaning. And we want to be able to communicate to our customers either by labelling or by other methods of communication, signposting, and include social media and front of house staff in this as well. In catering, if you get a query from a customer around allergens, then it's a good idea to follow the Safe Food, Food Allergy and Intolerance Guidance for catering document, which is a really useful document. Ask them to clarify so that you gather the information. Refer the query to the manager or a senior member of staff. Look for the information about ingredients that you have on site, and also consider may contain statements. Always be truthful. Share the information with the customer who has made the query, and the bottom line is that the customer decides. They decide whether they want to eat the food item or not based on the information that you have on site. We need to validate our cleaning, and you need to create a worst case scenario, and you then clean your work surface or your piece of equipment down. We test for the presence of the allergen first of all as our control to show that we're able to find the allergen. We then do our full clean down. So follow our standard cleaning routine, no extra cleaning, just your normal standard cleaning routine. And then you will swab using the ELISA method. And the ELISA method is the method that we need to use for validation to show that we have cleaned effectively and that we've removed any allergen residues. And also then test product that goes back down the line following the cleaning to show that there's been no carry through of the allergen through to products that go through after this. Challenge your best methods of control. And then on an ongoing basis, you're going to verify your cleaning using your rapid allergen tests and do continuous product testing as well. And then we should verify an additional method of auditing, making sure that your allergen control procedures are always being followed. So what lies ahead for us in allergen control? What new allergens may come to light and how this will impact both catering and manufacturing, we need to keep on top of that. We need to ensure that our effective risk assessments are maintained and are kept up to date. And we need to constantly think about how we are communicating our information to our stakeholders, so to our customers and to the consumers. I hope that in this short session today, I've been able to give you a little bit of an insight into the difficulties that we have with regards to managing allergens and some ideas on how best to do this. There are some information sources, and I know SafeFood will send these out to you. Just a few here that I have that I've found very useful. So allergyaction.org, SafeFood, FSAI, Food Standards Agency, Anaphylaxis, Highfield, where some of my slides have come from today, Celiac Organisation, the Natasha Foundation, and the World Health Organization, the FAO part of that. Thank you for your time today. If you have any further queries, I'm happy to take questions now from the room, but also if you do need to contact me in the future, I'm more than happy to help you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn, for that very comprehensive review of allergen management. And now, folks, it's over to you. This is your chance to ask any pressing questions that you may have. And I'd ask you to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Lynn, I just kick off. I'm conscious that food businesses, not only do they have their usual hygiene obligations to meet and allergen control obligations, but now they've got to deal with this probably COVID controls as well. So on top of everything. And I'm just wondering, is there any overlap between the lot? That if you look after your COVID control, then you're 90% there to maybe look after your allergen, your hygiene controls, and so on. Have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is some level of overlap that is there. If you have, good clean facilities, that will take into account spillages and, cleaning in between production processes. Those are all going to be helpful with your allergen controls. But what I would be saying is, yes, COVID controls are something that we really are having to look at, but consider allergens as part of that. Have you changed your menu items? Are your suppliers still able to supply you what they supplied before? Don't just assume that you go back and that you're ordering the same menu or the same raw materials from previous suppliers. Those suppliers may not be supplying the same ingredients to you. They may have had to source from somewhere else themselves. So it's important that you do those checks. Use this time effectively as you reopen. Take the time. So yes, of course, you've got all the COVID extra things, and I realise there's a lot of extra controls that need to be there, but really take the time and consider the allergens is what I would be saying on that one.
Yeah. And we have a question here. I'm looking to use a contract manufacturer for a chocolate product. What documents should I ask them for to see that they control allergens correctly?
Okay, so I would ask for a copy of their HACCP plan, first of all, and within that hazard analysis, they should have considered allergens as a potential hazard, and also ask them for a copy of their allergen controls. And so if they're going to be contract packing, perhaps you're manufacturing the product, but if they're actually going to be manufacturing for you, then you would be wanting to see the allergens that are present in the product as well. So what else are they contract packing? So who else are they contract packing for? They could be handling other allergens. So what are their spillages? What are their cleaning policies? And ask questions around that. I would probably go and visit them as well, or ask to see a third party audit inspection that has been carried out, and really home in on the allergen controls that they have. I hope that answers that.
And you mentioned in your presentation gluten in vinegar. What's the situation with malt vinegar, as this can often be found in products which are labelled gluten-free? That's a good question now.
It's one that I come across all the time, where manufacturers ask for a gluten-free malt vinegar, and it depends which supplier you go to. Some will claim that it's gluten-free because they haven't been able to find it in the product, and others will not give that guarantee because they know that it could be there even though it's not detectable. So that is the challenge on that one.
Yeah, and gluten obviously is probably one of the hardest allergens to control in, when you consider that it just spreads everywhere. Flour, if you open a packet of flour, it just spreads everywhere. I mean, what advice would you give, particularly to the smaller food businesses? I'm thinking, of the caterers and, people like that, cafes, seaside cafes, if they wanted to offer a gluten-free choice, for instance, what would they need to consider?
Yeah, I think if you're going to claim that something is gluten-free, you need to be very careful. So you might have a gluten-free bread that you can use to produce a sandwich for somebody in a cafe, and you can put lots of controls in place where you maybe prepare them in a separate area in the kitchen and on a chopping board. But I would always make it very clear that there are other items containing gluten in the premises. So you can't really claim that it's gluten-free. You can say that there's no gluten in the recipe, but you can't really make that claim that it's gluten-free. I know often people will offer gluten-free brownies and things like that, and the way around that might be buying them in from a manufacturer who make them on a gluten-free site, and then have them wrapped. They're fully wrapped for you, and you then sell them on.
And keep them separated on your own premises as well, and fully wrapped so they don't get contaminated. It's so easy to happen. We have a question here. What would be the expectation in terms of the use of ELISA kits within a typical catering or takeaway premises?
I would think that it's probably unlikely that you are going to go down that route. It would be something that would be a requirement under manufacturing. So I think it's a big ask for a catering facility to do that level of testing. So you're going to be very much relying on information coming from your suppliers, and then doing practically what you can do best. But that's where you can't really make the claim that something is totally, for example, gluten-free. You can't make that claim. You're handling those ingredients on site as well.
Yeah, I think we can safely say it, Lynn, that it's just not an issue for carrying out testing like that in a catering premises. It just doesn't make it's not practical, I suppose.
Yeah,
in that sense. If there are any more questions, folks, you can just put them in there to the Q&A. Another one on ELISA kits. Where can ELISA test kits and rapid test kits be sourced?
Yeah, there's a number of organisations that can offer that to you. Certainly, if you want to drop me a line, I can point you in the direction, as I'm sure Safefood could, of a few organisations that can send those to you. And there's some really useful organisations out there who can really help you do that testing, and they have lots of guidance available so that it's fairly straightforward for you.
Yeah. Okay, if any other questions, ladies and gentlemen, I'm conscious of the time, probably hanging for a coffee now, I suppose, at this stage. Okay, thanks, Lynn. Just a reminder to everyone that the evaluation link will be emailed to you shortly, along with a link to Join Our Knowledge Network, which has a wealth of print, audiovisual and other online resources for small food businesses in particular, both on allergen management and on other aspects of food safety. It's free to join, and as a member, you'll be informed of other events and resources once these come on stream. In addition, a link to today's webinar will be emailed to you once this presentation is uploaded. We just have one more question coming in. Again, it's to do with ELISA. There's a run on ELISA kits today. How common is the use of ELISA? And I presume you mean in the catering sector. I presume you mean in the catering sector. Have you ever come across somebody using ELISA kits
not in catering, only in manufacturing.
Only in manufacturing.
Yeah. In manufacturing, absolutely would be a necessity.
Yeah. That would make, I suppose, a lot of sense. Folks, I just want to remind you that Lynn will be doing 2 further interactive workshops on this theme, specifically aimed at small food businesses in October. The workshop on Tuesday morning, the 5th of October, will focus on allergen management in the catering sector, and the workshop the following day, Wednesday, the 6th of October, will focus on allergen management in food manufacturing. So keep an eye out for further announcements on these. So,
sorry, James, just in relation to those workshops, places are limited, so
yes.
To book early to avoid disappointment.
Yes, get in early to avoid disappointment. Okay, thanks, Trace, and thanks, Lynn, again for a fantastic roundup of allergen management. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and hope you enjoyed this. Hope it is sunny wherever you are, and that you enjoy midsummer. All right, take care.
Thank you, everyone.